This is my novel, Confessions of a Farmers Market Romeo, published just a few weeks ago by Sunbury Press. And this is the story of how the cover went from my initial little sketch that I drew 4 years ago to the final product with just one little weird, funky turn along the way. And this is the back of the cover with the blurbs. And at the end of this, I'll talk about my experiences trying to get blurbs from famous people. So to start at the beginning, my wife and I made our living for 12 years selling baked goods at farmers markets. And one of the markets we did was on the square in Gettysburg, and that's where I was standing the day that I got the idea for the novel. I knew my story would be set in Gettysburg during the 1970s because that's when I grew up in town. And I knew that I wanted it against the backdrop of farmers markets. And I also knew that I wanted it to be structured like a Netflix limited run series where each of the chapters or episodes, as I call them, would take about 45 minutes to read. They'd each have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And they would tell the story of the main character from the time he's 12 years old and falls in love at first sight at a farmer's market until he's 24 and he finds the love of his life again at a farmer's market. So when I went home that day, I quick sketched out the little design of the cover, and then I spent the next 2 years writing the first draft. And when I thought I had a pretty decent version, I got a friend of mine, Rachel Watson, to work on the cover a little bit more. And that's the first sketch she did. And then we talked a little bit and got something like that was way closer to the final product. And then we talked about colors, and that was her first color version. And then real quickly, within like 2 or 3 weeks, she got the finished version to me. So once I had Rachel's artwork, I found a font I liked, and I came up with that. And then I thought, well, book is set in the 70s. It has a real, that 70-ish feel to it. So it'd be kind of cool if I could make it look like a book that somebody discovered in like a secondhand bookstore, and it was, all faded a little bit, and it had the wrinkles and the water stains and all that. So I went and got my brother's Lord of the Rings books from that time period, and I scanned that in, and I kind of got all the rips and tears and all that, and Frankenstein together or something that looked like that, a distressed copy. And I thought that looked pretty cool. So the idea was I would have a polished manuscript and like the cover concept, and I'd have it fairly well executed so that when I try to get an agent or a publishing company, I could present that all as a package and that might help me. So amazingly, that worked. I actually got a contract. I signed with Sunbury Press in May of 2021. And when you sign a contract, you're leasing your intellectual property in exchange for royalties. So it kind of works that you have input, but you don't really have final say over anything like the editing, the price, and the cover. And also, when you sign a contract, you got to be prepared to wait a really long time. So about a year went by, and eventually I was assigned an editor. And at the same time, I was assigned a cover artist. And she looked at what I had done. And after a few weeks, she sent me this, Confessions of a Farmers Market Romeo. So her and I didn't really have a meeting of the mind on that. And so we talked on the phone and tried something else, and that didn't really work either. So in the end, we decided just to go with the original artwork that I submitted and clean it up a little bit and accent a few things. So that's how we got back full circle 4 years later. And to me, the coolest, best part of the whole story is the blurbs on the back. So even before the editing starts and the cover concept and all that, you're trying to get blurbs, and they're just praises from famous people that you can put on the back of the cover. And I knew I wasn't Stephen King, so I'm not going to get anybody famous. So I thought, well, I'm going to try for like somebody that is kind of medium well known, like maybe somebody from a sitcom from the 70s or whatever that would tie into the book. So I tried a bunch of those, and mostly I got ghosted, but the few people that did respond gave me some variation of there's really no upside to do this for you because we don't get anything out of it. And what if you wrote something in your book that 10 years from now people decide to take umbrage at, and you wind up getting canceled? My name's on your book. So I got that argument. So from there, I thought, well, what I really need is somebody that is already been canceled, or somebody so famous you can't cancel them, or somebody who's a outspoken opponent of cancel culture. So I thought John Cleese of Monty Python. My YouTube feed is always, bringing up interviews with him, and John's always saying about how they could never do now what they did with Monty Python back in the 70s and 80s. So actually, I tracked down his email and I sent him a request for a blurb, and I included about 2,000 words of excerpts, stuff that I thought he would laugh at. He might think it's funny because my book is a 70-ish comedy. So about 2 days later, I get an email back, and it's not from him, but it's from his personal assistant, and she says no, but it was such a polite and respectful no, and it was just so nicely worded that I didn't feel humiliated in any way. I actually felt inspired to keep trying to get more blurbs from people. So I tried a few more people that were pretty well known from the 70s and 80s and everything, and unfortunately they weren't anywhere near as gracious as John Cleese's assistant. I got kind of nasty, scathing stuff back, and one of the stars actually at the end of the email, which was kind of an FU email, they put something at the end saying that if you would like a glossy signed autograph of me, please include $10 and send a self-addressed stamped envelope to the following address. So after that guy tried to sell me his photograph for $10, I was pretty demoralized. I thought, nobody famous is ever going to give me the time of day. I understand that. I couldn't really blame them. But I thought, I still have one email left, and that was Martin Popoff. And Martin is a famous Canadian rock and roll journalist, and he's pretty well known in the States here too. And I see him all the time on a couple YouTube channels that I watch. His is called The Contrarians, and every Friday he's on Sea of Tranquility, and I watch that all the time. It's a show just critiquing rock and roll and heavy metal. And the thing that I always thought was really cool about Martin Popoff was that, he's my age, but he is just, when he talks about this stuff, he is just so passionate, and it doesn't come across as phony or anything. It's very honest and genuine. And to me, that's like really cool and unique that you can come across, and your passion just comes across like that. So I told my wife, I said, nothing's going to come of this, but before I give up, I'm going to send him a request. And I included about a 2,000 word excerpt again, and this one leaned really heavy on rock and roll. And I emailed it off to him. I wasn't expecting anything to happen. And then about 2 hours later, I checked my email, and there's an email from Mr. Popoff, and he's saying, "Sure, Jim, I'd be happy to do a blurb for your book." And it was so freaking cool because I didn't expect it. I was, at that time I was feeling pretty defeated by the whole process. And just the idea that he would say yes was just, again, amazing. So I didn't want to screw it up. So I wrote an email back, and I had my wife look at it quick to make sure I didn't say anything stupid. And Martin and I went back and forth a couple times, and I sent him a PDF of the novel. And late that night, he sent back a blurb, and it's on the back of my novel for everybody to read. And it's really cool because I like that whole blurb story because, it's just a small thing, a blurb for my silly book. And but it shows people at their worst, and then it shows them at their best. And I'm always going to appreciate both those things because it gives it context, and it shows how people, because you get kind of jaded and everything, but it shows how a lot of people really are genuinely nice people. So that's the story of my book cover. And In the description below, there's a little synopsis of my book and a link to the Amazon page and a link to my website. And if you go to the Amazon page, if any of this is interesting to you, you can read an excerpt from my book. If you click on Kindle, you can go a little farther. I think you can read almost the entire first chapter. So there it is, and if you're interested.